Hey again, friends. It's Wednesday, and this week I decided to put out a video each day for each of the lectionary readings that we're going to be doing this Sunday. My selfish hope in this is that it'll make me feel like I don't need to hit every single point on Sunday, but also for the sake of the body, I thought maybe it'd be beneficial for everyone to spend time meditating on these readings before we come together and worship this Sunday. So on Monday we covered our Old Testament reading, the death of Moses. Yesterday we covered Psalm 90, which is the only psalm attributed to Moses. And I think the Revised Common Lectionary people were hoping that we would be carrying the memory of Moses in mind as we come to the New Testament reading, which is 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 1 through 8. So here's what that says. And this is the New International Version. You know, brothers and sisters, that our visit to you was not without results. We had previously suffered and had been treated outrageously in Philippi, as you know, but with the help of our God, we dared to tell you his gospel in the face of strong opposition. For the appeal we make does not spring from error or impure motives, nor are we trying to trick you. On the contrary, we speak as those approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel. We are not trying to please people, but God, who tests our hearts. You know we never used flattery, nor did we put on a mask to cover up greed. God is our witness. We were not looking for praise from people, not from you or anyone else, even though as apostles of Christ we could have asserted our authority. Instead, we were like young children among you. Just as a nursing mother cares for her children, so we cared for you. Because we loved you so much, we were delighted to share with you not only the gospel of God, but our lives as well. And thus ends that reading. I'm very fond of a lot of the New Testament letters. And I grow more fond of the Old Testament, but a lot of times with readings like this, I get very clear about what my role as a pastor is, what our role as the church is. We find ourselves historically in a location where there is a lot of confusion about what it means to be a Christian, what it means to be a Christian leader, and what it means to be the church, what constitutes the church. You find a lot of leaders diametrically opposed to one another. You find a lot of Christians diametrically opposed to one another. You got a lot of local churches. And within my own tribe, the United Methodist Church, you have churches that think of other local churches within their communion as anathema. And they preach such from the pulpit. There is wide disagreement when you come to people's personal opinions about who Jesus was and is and who he calls us to be. And so sometimes I find memes online very helpful for kind of distilling an idea. And I wish I could remember the phrasing of the meme I posted yesterday. I just thought it was so concise. It said something like, do you read the Bible, or is there another version of God that you prefer following? Which, of course, is the notion that the Bible contains a portrait of God. It's not subject to our own interpretation. Rather, there's a portrait painted of God, and you can either like it and obey it, or you can hate it and rebel against it. So there was another meme I posted this week. The same water. Oh, I remember the other version of this better, but the notion is the same water that boils the egg softens the potato. Likewise, the gospel is going to harden some hearts and make some hearts softer and open hearts to the gospel. And there is no way to know who that's going to be. You just have to give the good news to people. And a lot of people, especially today in America, respond with hostility and hatred to the good news, which is that despite the fact that we're born in sin and worthy of condemnation, that there was a cup of wrath saved for us to drink, that Christ chose to drink that cup of wrath on our behalf and make us eligible for salvation through the sending of his sanctifying Spirit, which cleanses us of sin and makes us whole in God. So Paul, if you've read Acts of the Apostles, he's the one who read this letter we just read. He traveled from city to city telling this good news. And it had the same effect back then that it has today because it's the same good news. Many people took offense, Jews and Gentiles alike. The gospel is offensive, which is why Christ offered a special blessing to those who didn't take offense at him. You don't say that if you're not offensive. Christ knew he was offensive. The message he brought is offensive. Paul brought this offensive message to people all over the Eastern Mediterranean, Northern Mediterranean region. He had missionary journeys. He would show up. He'd go to the synagogues, the Jewish meeting places first. And then once he got kicked out of there, he would go to the local Gentiles, where he often saw more success than with the Jews, with whom the groundwork had been laid by God through the prophets. So anyway, he's writing this letter to the church in Thessalonica, the believers in Thessalonica, and he's recalling the history that he has between them. He's writing to encourage them, and in so doing, he kind of rehearses their relationship together. And one of the things that I want to say on the front end, just in case I don't come back to it, is following Jesus is relational. You ever notice that you got some Bible thumpers in the U.S. that use the phrase a personal relationship with Jesus Christ? They kind of identified that for a lot of people, their religious life was not relational. It was conceptual. They could imagine it. They could talk about it. They could assent to it, but it wasn't relational. So by relational, I mean there is an other that you are lovingly involved with and dynamically, interpersonally, emotionally tied to. So within the church, we reflect our love of Christ in our love for one another. And that was the new commandment that Christ gave us, to love one another as he loved us. So when you love somebody, you take joy in rehearsing how you first met, how your relationship grew. I love telling the story of how Sarah Beth and I met, even though it's not really appropriate for a pastor couple. Every saint has a past and every sinner has a future, right? So anyway, let's look back through this for a second, because he's rehashing how they met. He says in verse 2, we had previously suffered and been beaten, been treated outrageously in Philippi. And this is detailed in Acts of the Apostles. Paul got beat up. He got maligned. He got chased out of town. He got stoned one time. They thought he was killed. I don't remember if that happened in Philippi. I should. But he says, even though we were beat up, we dared to tell you his gospel in the face of strong opposition. So there was opposition in Thessalonica, and the people were just waiting for Paul to open his mouth so they could bash his face in. And he said, we're bold to tell you anyway. Why? Verse 3, for the appeal we make does not spring from error. So we weren't wrong. We're not wrong. Everybody thinks that, but Paul knows it. I remember Charles Barkley came out with a book title called I May Be Wrong, But I Don't Think So. I thought that was the best book title ever. But anyway, he says, our appeal does not spring from error or impure motives. So impure motives can cover a wide array of things, but the notion is it's not for personal gain. It's not for anything other than what we said it was. We had pure motives when we came to you. Nor are we trying to trick you. So yeah, there's tricksters are not a new thing. They've always been around. People have always been coming and trying to sell snake oil. But he's saying, no, this was the real deal. Verse 4, on the contrary, we speak as those approved by God. God put his stamp, his seal on us. We're not trying to please people, but God. And that's a very important distinction to make. This is something that convicts me. As a pastor, I read this, and I wonder what other pastors think as they look on this, but it's such a clear reflection of who we're supposed to be rather than who we are. Pastors are notoriously people pleasers. A biblical term for that is ear ticklers. They say what they think they know people want to hear rather than what Christ says they need to hear. And so he says, whenever I spoke to you the gospel, and remember gospel means good news, whenever we spoke to you the gospel of Jesus Christ, we were bold because we knew we were going to get punished for it, and we knew you were going to get punished for it. But also we were pure in our hearts, and we didn't care what they thought or even what you thought. We only care about what God thinks. And finding someone with that kind of integrity is rare. I want to come back to that. We're not trying to please people, but God who tests our hearts. Verse 5, we never used flattery, nor did we put a mask to cover up greed. So flattery is not saying anything nice. It's saying something dishonestly nice, either exaggerating the good or just highlighting something good that isn't there. They never did that. They didn't butter people up, and they didn't seek to make money. They didn't use this as a fundraiser to collect more money that they could then pocket. God is our witness. Verse 6, we were not looking for praise from people, not from you or anyone else, even though as apostles of Christ we could have asserted our authority. He's saying we could have made you, really show a lot of respect to us and give us a lot of money because we have that authority from God. Instead, we were like young children among you. What he means by that, very humble. Young people didn't have any social standing. And so Paul was saying, we didn't lord our authority from God over you. Rather, we were very humble. Just as a nursing mother cares for her children, so we cared for you. Because we loved you so much. We were delighted to share with you not only the gospel of God, but our lives as well. And I think that's such a great note to end on, because for so many people, the church is this kind of artificial social club where they put on their best brave face, they show up, they nod along with what the pastor says, and they look around and they pretend that everybody's on the same page, and then they go home and they go back to a mess, and they don't know what they're doing, and they're not reading their Bible, and they're not praying, and they're not living in the Spirit. The dream of the church is a relational body that knows and loves one another and is known and is loved by one another. It's a mutual, accountable body with integrity in Christ Jesus. That's the dream of the church. And whenever we do anything less than that, we sell the church out for something with the form but not the power of righteousness. So here Paul is talking about whenever he brought the word to the people, and he says, I set the example by being entirely genuine, humble, and vulnerable to you, and not seeking to gain any money from you. And if you know about Paul, he was a tent maker. He had a trade that he was capable in, and he made money through, and then he just built up the church wherever he went because he was able to, because God called him to. Now, pastors today walk in the same footsteps as Paul, and we live much more comfortably than him. And we do seek to please men and God at the same time, and we're reluctant to acknowledge situations where those two things are at odds, and they're at odds all the time. And I'm not going to pretend to be pure and perfect in this. I have a wife and 3 children that I want to put food on the table for, so I'm reluctant to offend people when I don't have to. I'm reluctant to risk my paycheck. And God has been very good to me. He's given me 2 little churches to serve that don't take offense whenever we talk about the pure word. They love me and my family despite my limitations and idiocies. And, they pay me enough. But also, a place where a pastor's integrity is displayed is in how much he or she is paid. And this is something that Americans, I don't know why they don't talk about it enough, but if a pastor is getting rich from the gospel, that is a clear sign that they're in it for greedy gain. The King James talks about filthy lucre. But nobody should be getting rich preaching the word of God. And of course, people in another part of the world would look at my budget and say, he is rich. But let me just tell you something about me. I think I could always do better. But listen, people slip pastors' money under the table all the time. There's your base salary, and then people pay you for weddings and funerals, or visiting someone at the hospital, or just giving a good sermon or something. And I've always felt conflicted by that because I'm not in this for the money. My churches pay me enough to live well with my family. So what I've done is Sarah Beth and I have established an endowment fund for us where we put that, any additional money that comes in, we put it in that endowment fund, and that endowment fund just goes to pay the churches that we serve. So there's money that we put in. I was talking about endowments yesterday. Well, these endowments, we also have an endowment for each of our children that does the same thing. Anytime someone gives our kids money, the money goes to glorify God by building up his church in perpetuity. So anyway, one of the most ancient lines of wisdom was found on an ancient pagan temple. Man, it was the big one to the Greeks. I can't think of its name, but above the doorway it said, "Know thyself." K-N-O-W, know thyself. And here, Paul is helping them know themselves. He helps them know him and know God better. Knowing the identity and defining the relationship is absolutely essential for following Christ. And the only way you get that identity of who God is you read the Bible. And the only way you really are faithful in the church is by knowing one another and being known by others, being emotionally available to one another. And then the only way that you really can know yourself to be saved is to know yourself, to know your own sin, to know your foibles, your strengths, and to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. So as we're looking at, I'm not going to give this sermon on Sunday. I don't know what I'm going to say on Sunday, but as you've gone through this with me, as you're looking through this on your own time and your own way, you need to be reflecting on, is there any way that I can decide what pastors I can and cannot trust in my life? Do I ever get the sense that a pastor is flattering me, or that they're not being entirely genuine, or not emotionally available? I'm well aware that there are many pastors who think it is their job, kind of like clinicians, to be emotionally distant from the people, to not be vulnerable, to not be vulnerable is the word of the day. And when you look at Jesus, he was vulnerable. I mean, he was thick-skinned, he was kind of prickly, but he was vulnerable. He made himself so vulnerable to us that we killed him. That's how vulnerable he was to us. It's not right for a pastor to be emotionally distant, secretive, reserved. A pastor is here to share their life with the body of Christ. And unfortunately, the case is that we often build up artificial churches filled with people that don't show the love of Christ, who wound their pastors. And then we have pastors reacting defensively who just say, okay, well, I'm just not going to be emotionally available because they would hurt me if I was. That's the wrong answer. The right answer is to build up true churches that reflect what we find in here. And if we're not interested in that, then what are we doing here? What's the point? You've lost me. I don't know what the point is if we're not trying to please God rather than man by delivering the good news entrusted to the saints of the ages, and then calling the flock of Christ to come be together in him. That's what we're doing right now. That's what I'm doing right now. So let me end with an invitation. Join me in that. Christ did not die so that we could stay messy and chaotic and enslaved to sin. He died for us so that we could have this blessed community aiming towards the purity of the bride, that when Christ comes again in glory, we might be welcome in his kingdom. So come be a part of the kingdom community with me. I appreciate your time. God bless you.